This is probably going to be one of the strangest ruminations I've done in a while because, well, as you kind of probably already saw in the assessment, this is really close to being a lamentation rather than a rumination. Now, it isn't, but I mentioned in the assessment I'd really talk about the details of this, and I will do my best to do so. This might also be kind of a short video because, well, suffice it to say, I have kind of a bullet point list here of things I just want to run through that I found were negatives in this game. And I don't want to dwell on them too much, but I do feel like they deserve mentioning for reasons that I'll discuss when we get there. But before we talk about Watch Dogs at all, there are two things that cannot be avoided with regards to discussion when it comes to Watch Dog. Number one is hype. Now, I don't remember if I said I'd talk about this, but one way or the other, hype, there's a difference between hype and hype, okay? Now, we have hype, all right? Now, hype is when you're very excited for something. Hype is like, I'm really excited about the fact that the new Hobbit movie is coming out in December. I'm super hyped about that. I'm very excited for Beyond Earth that's coming out. I'm very excited for Galaxy of 3. I'm very excited about the new Warlords expansion. You know, I'm very excited about... I'm sure there's other stuff. There's plenty of other stuff. Point being, hype is when you are excited about something, you're interested in something, you're like, yeah, can't wait for it to come out. I'll talk about that more in a little bit, but in general, under most circumstances, I feel like there's nothing wrong with that. From now on, for the sake of ease of communication, we're going to call that HOIP. Okay? Then we have hype, which we'll start referring to as hype. The problem with hype is that hype is something that is generated by marketing campaigns in order to artificially or otherwise engender more interest within a given product. Obviously, in the gaming industry, this is kind of a problem. But this is true in all mediums, whether it comes to books or movies or television shows or video games, doesn't matter. In general, there is a rule when it comes to hype that you can follow, I'd say at least 60% of the time, probably more than that in all honesty. And that rule is the more hype there is, again, this is the marketing type, the more hype is generated, the less confidence that studio or developer or publisher or whatever has in the product actually succeeding, because from their perspective what they want is those at-release sales, because after a very short period of time, especially in the modern age of technology, this is where hype has really become a problem, and communication, it takes very little time for people and word of mouth to spread and people to go, oh, well, this is not, living up to the expectations that we had for it, or it's just plain bad. And that means that those initial sales are basically the bulk of the sales you're going to get ever. And so now you may be thinking, well, that's kind of short-sighted and foolish. And while it is, you have to understand that most of the times the people in charge of these marketing campaigns, the people actually pushing for them, the managers and executives involved, and then the actual marketing departments themselves have accomplished their goals fully. The executives and the managers in charge have actually managed to make it so that those initial sales figures are there and high, which means they can justify their budgets, which means they can keep their jobs, which means they probably get a nice little bonus or pay raise or whatever as a result of their extensive efforts involved therein, blah, 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 blah. And marketing department, of course, that is literally their job, is to generate, marketing to advertise their product. So it's really no surprise to me that this kind of thing happens, and happens semi-frequently too. In my experience, this is just personal, this is kind of segueing for a second, the kind of hype that is marketing generated that tends to be acceptable is the kind where it's either very simple or it lets the people do all the work. A good example is actually Skyrim. When Skyrim was first announced, it was just, November 5th or whatever it was, the date shows up, here's the trailer, that's it, nothing else. That was all that was needed. There was no big push for it, there was no big, oh my god, you must watch this. And the only time the advertising campaign really hit the swing of it was when the game was actually coming out. That's appropriate in my opinion. Now, you know where I'm going with this, of course, if you followed anything about this game. But Watch Dogs was so overhyped that it almost reached Peter Molyneux levels, in my opinion, which is not a good thing. Now, I don't have much else to add on that except my own personal experience with it. Admittedly, when I see something being hyped up by marketing, my automatic reaction is to be less inclined to be interested in it. However, I tried to give the benefit of the doubt and blah, blah, blah. As I think I mentioned in my assessment, though, by the time this game came out, I was already kind of sold, but it was more like I'll pick it up on sale or used or whatever and just kind of play through it at my leisure. Because every time they were like, oh my god, it'll be this, and it'll be amazing, and oh, it's going to be incredible, my interest levels just kind of dropped and dropped and dropped until it got to the point where, I don't know, I just couldn't bring myself to care anymore. Several of my streamers are aware of this because it was a question I was asked semi-frequently over the last 6 months or so was, what are you thinking about Watch Dogs? And I was just like, eh. Now, the other thing I cannot avoid talking about is the graphical issue. I'm only going to breeze through this. Yes, Ubisoft lied. Yes, they provably lied. Yes, they're stupid. That's really all I have to say about that when it comes down to it. So, it was retarded, and honestly, I feel like that was not conductive towards them actually making me give a damn about their game. Now, before we go ahead and zip forward into anything else, I want to talk about one other thing really quick with regards to the hype search section. Forgive me, I've got a big old thing of notes here. I've talked before about the entire concept. This was with regards to Assassin's Creed 3, about the entire cycle that goes through with gamers in particular, but this is true in all fields, about how some people like it, some people don't, and of these two groups, you get people who only like it because they get tired of people saying they don't like it, or you got people who only don't like it because they get tired of people saying they like it, and these people all loop and feed off of each other in this whole mess. I've already discussed this in decent detail. One of the things that I tend to hear very commonly, actually, with regards to a message being intended to attack other people is, oh, your expectations were just too high. Or the game couldn't possibly have lived up to your expectations of it, or, the book or movie or whatever. I've always felt that that is ignorant at best and downright foolish and stupid at worst to lay down an excuse like that as your method of attacking my or his or her or whoever's opinion with regards to this thing by saying, oh, well, I just expected it to be perfect. When no, I didn't. I expected it to be satisfying or good or acceptable. And if it fails to meet up to those expectations, well, then, yeah, I guess you could say that my expectations were just too high. But my point is sarcasm aside and rhetoric aside, I disagree with that very concept. I personally have never actually met someone ever who actually had, that kind of my expectations were too high, high in the pie, in the sky, apple pie, whatever that phrase is, expectations. I've never actually encountered that in my life. I'm sure it exists. Don't mistake me. I'm sure there are people who expected, Watch Dogs or Mass Effect 3 or Dragon Age 2 or Fable or whatever other game to be perfect and were thus disappointed because no game is perfect. I've talked about this a few trillion times, give or take. No game is perfect. Final Fantasy VI, in my opinion, the best game of all time, still is not a perfect game. It has flaws, it has irritants, it has things that frustrate me. But it is still an amazing game. I feel like I'm explaining why water is wet here, This is such a basic, mundane thing that I'm not even sure why people try to use the argument of, oh, your expectations are too high, because it is on the base of it silly. No, our expectations were not too high. Our expectations were that it would be an enjoyable game. Maybe we were hopeful for A, B, or C. Maybe we were really looking forward to an interesting story. Maybe we were really looking forward to examining the characters or the setting. Maybe we wanted a game, actual gameplay that was just really fun to play, regardless of the other two things. Maybe we wanted something that, we could replay regularly with satisfactory replay value, which we could really get our money's worth out of it. That is not having too high of expectations. If you honestly are going to tell me that any of those things is having too high of expectations of the gaming industry, that is just sad and just a little bit too cynical for me. I'm sorry. That should probably be, I'm just going to go ahead and say this, that should be the baseline of gaming standard. That should be ground zero. If you go below that, then work on it. Make it better. Do what you can. If you're not going to try to do that, then go away. So, I just wanted to comment on that here. So, let's Let's talk about positives about Watch Dogs. I swear there are some. Yes, there are some. No, I'm kidding. All right. One of the things that I loved most about this game, and admittedly also hated, I'll actually be talking about that later, was the magic hacking. Now, I say I love it and hate it because as a gameplay mechanic, I actually kind of dislike it. I'll talk about that later in the negative section. But as an idea and as the flavor of it and the feeling of being this, effectively a technology wizard, some kind of technomancer, if you will, I actually liked that. It was a cool little thing, and it was a nice kickback to the early 90s, late 80s ideal of hacking. For those of you who are not aware, hacking doesn't actually exist anymore. Not really. Hacking is a very outdated term because you can't actually do that anymore. Nowadays, when you say hacking, you mean one of several very mundane and boring things that anyone with the tools could do in order to try and either brute force or guess or sneak your way into a system. But that isn't actually hacking. That's not the term has endured. I'm not trying to pull it technically. But I mention this because the term has endured because of this romantic ideal. It's the same reason we consider pirates to not be the ridiculously, horribly, disgustingly awful things that they actually were in real life. Because the idea of pirate nowadays, thanks to media and social acceptability and of course, romanticization, has reached this thing where it's, the high seas and the freedom and the wind of the hair and yar, and then the booze and the gold, I'm with that, and that's why I'm saying that I'm not pulling it technically. I'm mentioning this because the term hacking has become a romanticized term, and I feel like this game is actually probably one of the coolest things outside of Die Hard 4. I know, right? To show hacking in this, magic hacking. I kept calling it that when I was talking to my friends and my sister about this game. I was talking about, oh, look, guess what I could magically hack today? And we were like walking through Walmart, and I could just make that happen and make that happen. And she looks at me, and she's like, that's not how that works. I was like, no, that's the best part. It's just, you can just do it. It's great. So I think that was a definite plus, and it really adds to the feel of the game. Which is this is the modern age. However, we're going to add a few technologies that don't exist in real life or aren't implemented in real life, and then kind of run with it. I'll talk about that more later when we get to the Assassin's Creed thing, but moving on. So the other thing I really loved, I got more to say about this, is the primary campaign missions, for the most part. I'm trying to think of how best to put this. I'll give you two specific examples, all right? But what I'm trying to lead to here is that you have a lot of choice, a lot of freedom in how you actually proceed through your objectives in most of the missions. Some of the Act 4 missions, Act 4 kind of took a nosedive in quality, and towards the end there like I said in Twitter, I just wanted to quit the game. I was so irritated and frustrated, and there was nothing positive anymore that was keeping the game up for me to want to play it. I'm glad I did. The end of the game was interesting, and there's a big reveal, which I'll talk about later, and after the spoiler section. But the mission structure, other than the Act 4 stuff, was really awesome because here's your objective, here's you, figure it out. Now, admittedly, this is harder to code and set up and lay out than it sounds. It really is. Setting basically a playground, not a sandbox, but a playground, and saying, here's your objective, here's you, and you can get over to that other objective and accomplish it in a number of different ways. I made a couple of notes here. You can Metal Gear Solid style your way through there and sneak through. You could just go through there guns blazing, like this is Grand Theft Auto, and just... You could hack your way through there, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. You could also get help, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But the idea here is that kind of freedom of operation really fleshed out the game to me and really made the missions a lot more enjoyable than they otherwise would have been. Half the time I found myself so disinterested and so just bored with whatever the plot line was at the moment. I was just like, yeah, okay, whatever. But I still kept playing because I was really interested in, okay, well, I have to get, for whatever reason, I have to get that thing over there. So, okay, how do I want to do this time? And I kept varying up my play style just to have fun with it, and I loved that. I said I'd give two examples. Fairly early on, I had a mission to get into this one chunk of the CTOS and hack it, which meant I had to get there and actually, hack the device by holding Q. This place was not swarming. It had like maybe 10, 15-ish armed mercenaries, right? So I get there. Now, at the time, I didn't realize I could do this. So the revelation that I could do this and the exploration of it as I was doing it was really awesome, admittedly. But I stopped just outside of the red zone if you've played Assassin's Creed, you know what I mean by the red zone. And I'm just hanging out there, and I'm checking the place out, casing the joint basically. And I notice there's a camera I can hack into, so I hop into it. And from that point on, I want you to picture this because this was so in character. My character, the vigilante, Aiden Pierce, is just hanging out there on his phone. Just kind of, I found a nice inconspicuous spot because I'm a role player. He's just hanging out, chatting, doing his phone thing. And then, without ever stepping 1 foot into the area, took out every single one of the guards. It took a while. It took like 10 minutes because that's kind of how it works. It's not like a super thing. You have to lure them into areas, and you have to use this, and you only got so many things you can either explode or drop or whatever. So you have to be careful and patient. But I was. And it was so awesome that I could literally hack my way to victory, completely wipe the place clean of hostiles without ever stepping foot in there. And then just once it was done and they were all gone, I went back to Aiden, whatever his name is, the vigilante, and turned off my hacking phone and just kind of waltzed right in and like, yep, bzz. That was awesome. The second one that was cool was when I was attacking the Fremont place. One of the times you attack it like 3 times, and I look in there, and the whole place is red. There's a lot of guards, and I'm just looking at that, and I kind of tilt my head to the side. And this was also the first time I had done this, so I'm like, okay. Pull out my sniper rifle, shoot in, get the main guy. Well, I made sure I get someone who was right next to someone else. That was very important. And I made sure that there were civilians walking around, because, here's the Fremont place. I'm out here, out in the street. Sniper, take out that guy. So, of course, the guards start streaming out. So I run around, make sure I have my gun still out. That's important. If you hide the gun, people won't notice. Come out, and as expected, several of the civilians saw me and are like, oh my God, well, what did you do? Oh my, there's a guy with a gun here. And they called 911, and they got the cops out there. Now, the cops rush out to the scene. I'm running and dodging from the guards who have left the area at this point. It took very little effort. In fact, I don't even remember if I did anything to convince the gangsters to start attacking the police. But one way or the other, the two just kind of started going into this all-out war with each other, to the point where the police were actually having to call in more reinforcements to take out these guards, and they were all streaming out of this building to take out the police. And I literally just walked right in, completely unopposed. It was awesome, and that's what I mean by the you can get help option. And of course, you can mix and match these too. You can sneak your way in, but if things go bad, you can guns blazing, or you can try to hack your way in. But if that doesn't work, you can sneak your way in, and you can mix and match as much as you want. And that was awesome. And honestly, I think that is probably the single biggest point in Watch Dogs' favor. Of everything else, of all the other things, and there are other positives, that really sold me on the game more than anything else, and is probably the main reason I went ahead and kept playing. I also feel like sharing 2 other quick things here. The first is the last mission was actually really cool. I just realized I can't actually talk about it. I can kind of talk about it. No, I'll save that till after the spoilers mission, after the spoilers warning. I'm going to make a note of this so I don't forget. Remember, talk about the last mission after spoilers. There we go. So that was really good. Definite positive. The other thing is this game has a very Cyberpunk 2020 kind of a feel to it, for those of you familiar with that setting and who's ever played that in tabletop. And the cool thing was a lot of it is analogous with, despite being somewhat less advanced, like the idea of fixers, who remind me a lot of solos, and the idea of netrunners, like Bad Boy 17 and Default and all that. And Damien was the other one. But I think the thing I liked most about that was the idea that your main character, the guy you play, the vigilante, he was actually a hybrid. He was basically a solo, and a really good solo, who was also a netrunner. Although he wasn't quite as much of a netrunner as certain other characters, he still had certain skills in that regard. Probably still solo primary. But that's always the kind of character that would be, awesome to play as in Cyberpunk 2020, so that was definitely a positive as well. Now, there will be other positives. There will. After I get past the spoiler line. So I apologize, but now it's time to start talking about negatives. The side mission, I'm just going to run through these. The side missions were boring, dull, and repetitive. Each one of them, I do recommend this if you play this game, do each type of side mission at least once. But you had, I made a note here, there's the races, and I put those in quotes. They're basically just like GTA races. You have to run from point to point to point, but there's no one else you're racing against. It's just time-based. That was fun the first time. Deliver a car without it taking damage, fun the first time. What do we got here? Playing chess. It's playing chess. I can't actually say that was fun the first time because I was playing chess in Watch Dogs. They have a shell game. And for those of you not familiar with that, that's where you try to guess where the ball is in the three cups and win money off of it. They had this virtual reality thing, which was actually kind of dull. I actually ended up quitting out of that before I even finished the first one. They have the random crimes, which are kind of interesting the first time and then get really repetitive and dull, especially given how linear and scripted they are. That always irritates me. Taking out the gang areas, those pissed me off because I'll talk about why later in the flaws problem area, but suffice it to say, the gang areas were very easy to mess up, and just it's always the same damn thing, and that's kind of my point. All of these things may or may not be worth trying once, and I do recommend you at least try all the side activities once, because there's quite a few of them. But then they just don't change. They just stay exactly the same repetitive kind of stuff. It's just in slightly different locales. And it was too repetitive. I've always said that, not everything has to be varied every time, right? I'm okay with a degree of repetition. I always have been. But this was so repetitive that it got to the point where I kind of started ignoring all side content. And every time I'd see something new, I'd try it out. And then I'd go back to the main campaign. Let's talk about hacking and why it's a problem. So yeah, I mentioned that as a gameplay mechanic, I do not like hacking. A little bit of a gameplay advice here for anybody out there who is an aspiring game designer, or indeed knows more about game design than I do, so you probably already know what I'm about to tell you. There is one button you push to hack. That's it. That is the full extent of the player's interaction. Now there are two huge problems with that. Number one, you have effectively just made hacking a use button. For those of you not familiar with that, it's common in many games, the Oblivion series, the Elder Scrolls series and the Fallout games come to mind. There's plenty of games that have just use, interact with whatever it is you're looking at, right? The Half-Life had that, for God's sakes. Hacking, in many ways, just kind of became a slightly fancier use button. And that led to the point where in some cases I actually found myself, in fact, many cases I found myself questioning why we even had the hacking mechanic. But that leads me to my second point. It's a one-button thing, which means that everything you do hacking-wise is going to be context-sensitive. That is incredibly stifling and limiting as a gamer, especially in a game that's already incredibly linear and very non-sandbox. I'll talk about that more later. But the point here is that sometimes certain things will be hacked in certain ways. Sometimes they will work like this. Sometimes you'll try to get this thing. Sometimes you're trying to hack something that's just behind something else and you can't get the camera angle. And that's another thing. Hacking is line of sight. I'm not even going to begin to go into that. But the point is, hacking is line of sight. So from a pure gameplay perspective, that can be irritating if you can't get the right angle to do what you want. And so from a design perspective, that means, by definition, hacking is going to be very limited. It's kind of like the jumping thing in many of the 3D Zeldas. There's no jump button. You just go towards an edge with the right amount of momentum and you jump at the right angle, hopefully. That can work, but it is, like I just mentioned, very limiting. You don't actually have the ability to jump when you want or need to. It's just context sensitive. And that kind of leads me to my other problem with that, is that I mentioned you have a lot of freedom in the missions, and that's a good thing. And by definition, they did as good of a job as they could have been expected to. But a lot of this game is very scripted, and the missions feel very set-pieced. In other words, there's lots of areas where there's something you can distract a guard with right here, and then there's something you can blow up on him. There's something you can do to pull him over here, and around the corner there's this thing you can drop on them, It's all set up like that so you can use it like that. And that's cool, and don't mistake me, I did have fun with it, as I mentioned earlier. But I feel like it would have been better in some idealized future if in this game, when we had the ability to hack, it wasn't just one button push. We could actually say, okay, I want to do this, or I want to make this go like this. Now, you may be pointing out the crafting system and the blackouts and all that stuff. I'll talk about that in a moment. Actually, I'll go ahead and talk about that now. The actual hacking, like I said, one button push. There's one other thing I didn't mention that you also have an option to do in the mission type. I apologize. I actually don't think I wrote it down. That is crafting. In other words, gadgets. There's a whole crafting system where you use bits and pieces that you find in order to make little items. You can knock out the power nearby, you can make a distraction, you can actually set down an explosive, you can throw a grenade. All these little gadgets are another option for you. another method with which you can go through missions and stuff like that. And that could be qualified as another type of hacking. I'm definitely putting that in quote unquotes. But honestly, I feel like that was such a different feel in its approach that I cannot qualify it as hacking. Still interesting, still good. The main limitation for it was that if you really want to use gadgets, you kind of have to full tilt focus onto the crafting tree in the talent system in order to do that. So let's go ahead and talk about the sandbox problem. This is without question the most linear sandbox game I've ever actually played. I know that sounds like weirdness, but it's true. You take the running and gunning, stealing car anywhere kind of aspect of most Grand Theft Auto style games, Saints Row, Just Cause, etc., and take the ability to run and dash and fight and sneak take down people from Assassin's Creed, and now you notice I'm not mentioning certain things. For example, you don't take all the fun, cool stuff you can do in Grand Theft Auto, the ridiculous guns, the overpowered body armor, and all that fun stuff, and you don't take the actual free running and parkour elements of Assassin's Creed, or indeed the many ways you can jump down on an enemy, that kind of thing. And so you only take a tiny chunk of both of these two games and merge them together, and that's kind of the game you're left with. And so as a result, and indeed in its mission style as well as the actual world, this game feels very linear. I noticed this very early on because my tendency in a GTA style game is to just take my car and go where I'm going. You can't really do that in this one. There's too many things that get in the way. Literally, I could not actually get off the highway until I got to an exit ramp because I couldn't get my car over the edge of the blocks that were in the way, which was actually kind of baffling to me. But that kind of thing continued to be a problem the entire way I was playing through the game. You can only drive in certain types of areas. There's the roads, of course, and then there's certain chunks of land that are acceptable to drive on. You can't run into certain things. You can't jump onto certain types of things. It's all very restrictive. And this is true in missions, too. You can't do anything you want in the missions. You can't go do this or distract here or pull this guy over here. You're still very limited, very linear style game. Not necessarily saying that's a negative, but it is. I'm building to a point here, so I'm just bear with me here. Combat. So yeah, combat was kind of weird. This is not the worst cover-based system I've ever seen, but it is definitely down there. You hit C. I'm playing on the PC, obviously. You hit C to go into cover, and you can move from cover to cover. And it's one of those situations, I'm sure you've seen this in other games too, I have as well, where you feel like you're glued to the wall and you have to do certain special actions to get yourself out. And this can lead to a situation where you're trying to move in cover and instead you get yourself spotted, which of course instantly ends the mission. Or you're trying to get out of cover and you can't, and so you get out in a bad way and then you're spotted and either ends the mission or you get shot to death. The cover system was very irritating and yet also required because there's no armor you can purchase. There's basically nothing you can do to increase your health. All you can do, and it's regenerating health style combat, by the way. All you can do is get into cover and wait for your health to come back. You cannot take very many shots. How few shots? Well, let's just say that on average, if I was rushing someone who had an automatic weapon of any type, I had about a 25% chance to reach them and take them down before they killed me. Now you may be like, oh, well, that's great. No, when I say rushing, I mean, well, of course you can't see, but it's like me to that door over there. He could kill me in those, well, that's actually not quite, maybe like that door over there. He could kill me in about 20 feet as I'm sprinting full tilt to try and reach him in time. The, the car physics in this game is very heavily built on the Assassin's Creed engine. I don't care what anyone else says. It's very obvious in the way it's approached and styled. The car physics are weird. I'm not going to say they're bad, because they're not bad. They're weird. It's really hard to explain. I tried to explain it to my friend Pax. There are different classifications of cars, which all have their different features. Some handle better, some have better health, some have better top-end speed, etc. But no matter what you're driving, the moment you get in that car, it basically functions like a tank in terms of its durability and ice skates in terms of its handling. And in very few cases, with very few exceptions, I should say, most of the cars I got and most of the vehicles I got in general had basically unlimited acceleration to the point where you could just kind of keep going faster. I never actually reached the end point of speed in any of these vehicles because I would run out of, straight run down the highway in order to test it before I ran out of acceleration. And of course, there's the space bar to use the handbrake, which that's probably the only thing that functions about like it normally does in games like these. Very Saints Row-y, to use a direct example. You know, it gives you the kind of a thing. And that brings me to the odd controls. Now, you can rebind them in the PC version, and I have no idea if it's any better in the console, so take this with a grain of salt. But the default PC controls are wrong. A lot of the key button combinations require you to, for example, be holding W, Shift, and then hit A, and then hit F, or then hit E, and then F. And in some cases, some buttons don't actually function the way they do all the time, and sometimes you have to hit Q, and then there's C, and just, I felt my hand doing this during a lot of this play. I was talking about this when I was playing New Vegas. It was very weird, constantly trying to get used to this control scheme. And when I finally rebounded it, it made it a little bit easier. But you actually can't rebind every key, which is another interesting problem. But then there's the camera. Now, again, this one is probably true for all the versions of the game, because it's the camera. I don't know about you guys, the camera in this game actually kind of bugged me. It was very close to the character. It had a little bit too much wobbliness to it, which actually kind of made me, on occasion, especially when I was running too long. And it did this distortion thing on occasion, which, I don't know, the whole thing, this is, again, another minor point, and I swear I'm building to something with all this, but yeah. So yeah, then there's the escaping mechanic. This is very similar to the Grand Theft Auto 4 method, if anyone's ever played Grand Theft Auto 4. As of course, there are stars, or rather blips, levels of threat warning, whatever you want to call it. It's stars, for it is always stars. And once you get to certain levels of wanted level, they'll send certain levels of cops after you. Very simple, very normal. I didn't know this at first. I'll talk about this more in the reputation thing, but my first thought was just to kill all the cops who were after me, which did not end the search, of course, and made them more angry at me, of course, and made me lose a ton of reputation. Go figure. I'll talk about that in a moment. But the point is, escaping at first seems like it's really irritating and frustrating and difficult, and it kind of is, except for the fact that it's actually also really, really simple and easy once you figure out the two tricks. For there are really two tricks to escaping. I'm going to tell you them right now. Get out to the water, because they literally cannot follow you into the water unless they have a helicopter. And if you disable the helicopter, it will stop having eyes on you. You have a hacking power, you can do that. You hit Q, and then you just keep sailing out, and then you lose them. Or find a nice alleyway and park the car. Hit F, I believe it is, to hide in the car. And as long as you're in a decent alleyway and you plan this at least partially correctly, they will not find you. So again, it's really weird, because at first it was super insanely difficult, and I could not shake these cops, and I could not get rid of them. Once I discovered those two tricks, it became the opposite. It was actually too easy to lose the cops, and it got to the point where I started to wonder why they were after me at all. I will talk about that more when we get to spoiler section, for reasons that'll be obvious when I get there. Now, the stealth mechanics in this game are bad. I'm just going to say it. There's two big reasons why. Reason number one, a lot of it is trial and error. And I always find trial and error in a binary pass-fail system to be irritating. There was one mission in particular where I actually had to put the game down for several hours, because I'm sneaking through an area. If I'm detected at all, it's over. And, well, okay, now, you've played Watch Dogs, right? Sure you have. So you're telling me, Archie, what are you talking about? The detection thing slowly fills up on the little warning bar until they get it. Yes, except for certain missions where it just instantaneously fills it. Within literally less than half a second. Just they detect you. There's nothing you can do about that. So during this mission, and there were several missions like this, during this mission, if I get seen at all, I get to start the whole frickin' mission over from the beginning of the stealth section. Very irritating. That leads me to my next point. I actually wrote down this thing. There was another section like this. I'll get to that in a moment. But there's no skipping the cutscenes, especially in the stealth missions where, like, say, for example, you're tailing someone. You just have to tail them through these sections you already know every single time. And if you try to hurry it up, you can't. So you have to go through the whole thing. Anyone remember Kingdom Hearts 1? When this was such a huge irritant in Kingdom Hearts 1 where you couldn't skip cutscenes? This is true in a lot of games, actually. Final Fantasy X is another big one. The original. I don't know if you can skip cutscenes in the PS3 remake, but the point remaining, that is an irritant, because anytime you put a big old cutscene before a boss fight or whatever, you fail the boss fight, guess what? You get to watch the whole thing over again, and it just grates on you. And that's what was irritating me. I had to sit there and follow this guy again And I knew exactly where the next 5 guys were again. And then, about 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes later, I finally get to the point where I'm up to the point where I was failing all the time, which brings me to my next point. That whole pass-fail thing, the reason it fails at stealth is, one, instantaneous failure means instantaneous loss of everything, no possibility of recovery. The Batman Arkham series is a great example of doing stealth properly, where you can stealth, and if you pull it off, you feel awesome and successful, but if you don't pull it off, you can still recover from it. Mainly Arkham Asylum is a big one, although Arkham City did that too. Second point is no clear indicative of where enemies are. Sometimes, because I mentioned the camera problem earlier, sometimes I would literally be detected and have no idea why or what detected me. I'm just walking along, sneaking my way through, and all of a sudden, mission failed. Now, in some games, they'll be smart and let you have a little bit of control over what's happening immediately after. Assassin's Creed is a good example of this. Well, they'll let you still move a bit in the slow-mo you're failing thing, so you can get a quick look around and try and figure out what failed you. Not in this case. I had no idea who or what was failing me half the time, and it was just some random guy who either wasn't one on my minimap, because I hadn't put eyes on him, or I didn't have my profiler up, or whatever, or it was some random guy who was in a location that I literally could not see or tell where he was or where he was looking because of that camera problem and the limitations thereof. It got really old. And then, well, okay, let's go ahead and mention the other irritant. I mentioned the cutscenes problem. I actually took notes on this one. Here's the thing. I actually only failed this mission 6 times. I counted. But each time I failed, and again, I counted, it was a fighting mission. Those of you who've played this game can probably identify it based on how I'm describing it. But you have a certain period of time to set up, then some guys attack you, then you have time, to do whatever, recover, and then some other guys attack you, right? Pretty simple, actually. And like I said, I only actually failed it 6 times, which may not sound like a lot, but I counted. The first cutscene, as you're setting up the first time, is 70 seconds long. And then you kill these guys, and then it's 48 seconds before the next round shows up. And I never failed on that first wave, which means I had to wait the 70 plus the 48 every single time. Unskippable, incapable of doing anything about it. That is actually bad game design like 105 or something like that. That is a horrible flaw in game design. I'm amazed it got into this game. And this is not the only example of that. That's just the only one I took down the numbers from. There were several examples of can't skip it. But that was probably also the most egregious example. 70 seconds and then kill 3 guys, which I could do instantly by the time I was like on my second try or third try or whatever. And then 48 seconds of just... It got to the point where I had to take my headphones out and put them down and just sit there staring at the game. Oh, that's another thing. Obviously, this is going to be just as much of a problem for console players, but on the PC, I couldn't Alt-Tab. I'm playing I'm playing there. I couldn't Alt-Tab. I couldn't do anything else. The game was literally forcing me in order to play this. And you might be like, well, what do you mean you couldn't Alt-Tab? If you Alt-Tab, the game pauses. So I could feel like the game is like, don't worry, the cutscene will be here as soon as you're back and ready to pay attention to it like a good boy. I wanted to throttle my computer. Oh my god. Let's go ahead and talk about the reputation system. Now, the reputation system is another one of those things that, like this whole list, except for the stealth mechanic, is not necessarily bad, but not necessarily good at the same kind of thing. The idea is it's your reputation as an overall with the city, how the citizens, how the people, how the news views you. And it's really, really easy to drive it into the negatives, even if you're not trying to, because just about anything you kill that isn't actually a criminal or in a mission will put you in the negative, even if you do it by accident. And you only get pluses for foiling crimes, taking down gangs, and doing main missions. So yeah, I did end up with a net positive, but I literally guarantee you there were only 2 sources of me losing rep the entire game. I mentioned the first one. I killed those cops right at the beginning. And, then I lost tons and tons of rep, and I spent a decent while trying to recoup from that. The other source of rep loss was actually very irritating, though, because in many games like this, the GTA-style games, the AIs of the random roamers, the pedestrians, have this pathing or this coding in their heads where they will try to lunge out of your way if they see you coming. And the distance at which they'll lunge and the direction they'll lunge, there's a lot of variables in that. I'm not going to get into that. Point being, they had a really, really, really common habit of lunging into my car. Now, this is not the only game with this problem, but this game actively penalizes you if you hurt or kill any civilians. So, literally, other than that one mix-up, all of my rep losses were because people were suicidally flinging themselves in front of my car. I found myself coming up with like this whole background story of these people who were actually trying to kill themselves because of how depressing this whole situation was, in order to try and make sense of it, because it was just such a commonality for me. Alright, we're going to go ahead and cut off the spoilers thing here. I'm not going to use the Inception noise anymore because I don't want to get sued for stupid and retarded reasons. So I'm going to have to come up with another noise here. I don't even know what it is now, but when I edit this, I'll put it together right here. I'm fraught with anticipation. So yeah, spoilers. Let's talk about why Aiden Pierce is a terrible character. Aiden Pierce is exactly the kind of character I would expect a 10-year-old to write if I sat down and said, make a cool character. He is almost a caricature of all the things that are stereotypically cool and yet presented so poorly and executed so poorly that the whole time he comes across as more of a loser than someone who is actually cool. And I don't use that word lightly. I don't like the word loser, but it's kind of apt in this case. He is someone who, he does the low narration. He talks about how dramatic everything is. And then he talks about how he must keep everyone separate from him. And then he lies to people, and then he acts all tough, and then he tries to show his vulnerable side. And it was all so ridiculously cliche that it took me completely out of the character. And I'm going to blame that fully on the voice actor. Everything I just said probably sounds like me complaining. Oh, shoot, I forgot to mention. I'll get to it. Everything I just said sounds like me complaining about the writing, which I'm actually not. A good voice actor could have salvaged that role. Embracing those kind of cliches is something that I feel is something that can be accomplished very well. It depends on your execution. See The Expendables for a good example of a movie series that I honestly like because they embrace the cliches openly and with enthusiasm. But in this case, they got the most boring, drab, disinteresting, cardboard voice actor I have heard in a long time. Not a bad voice actor. That would have actually been better. I wish they had gotten a bad voice actor. I actually put a note here. I wish they had gotten Arnold Schwarzenegger to voice this guy. I'm not even kidding. It would have improved my enjoyment of this if there was just some guy talking about, I must clean up this city. It will rule the day. I can't do an Arnold voice. It's totally cliche. It would rue the day that it crossed me. And someone like that who's actually pushing forth that kind of, embracement of the cliches. Instead, we get someone, and I'll talk about this more later, who's trying to be all serious and somber, and it comes across as boring. It's a problem that Star Trek actually had a lot, and forgive me for the segue. Getting people to play Vulcans is actually very difficult. It's very difficult to play a Vulcan properly because they are not plain, nor are they bland, nor are they boring. But most people, when they try to portray emotionless, they portray someone who is dull. And that actually happened a lot in various Star Trek things. It takes a special thing to portray a Vulcan. And in this case, I feel like he had the exact same problem, basically. He was just, I am the one who will defend this city. No one will stand against injustice. Oh, God, I'm boring myself talking about it. I also have another note here next to the Arnold Schwarzenegger note. I actually think it would have been more... it also would have worked if he was a silent protagonist. This is the second time I've said this with regards to a Ubisoft game. He just... Oh my god, it was so... Okay, several people who on my Assassin's Creed 3 video, commented that maybe they felt like the actor was doing that kind of a portrayal on purpose to show that it was his second language. And that is a valid thought, and one that had not actually occurred to me until people had started mentioning it. I still disagree, purely because the end product still comes across as boring and drab because of the presentation, and I feel like that would have been an acceptable loss to have someone who actually had some acting talent to do it, but I will grant the point. I will. In this case, what the hell is Aiden's excuse for being Mr. Boring Cardboard, I wonder? I'm actually reminded of Mark Meer's presentation in Mass Effect 1. Not making fun of Mark Meer, but as we all know, Mark Meer wasn't actually reading those as it was his job. He was doing a test run. I forget what they actually call that. But it's done very often. You'll get someone who'll just read through the dialogue so they can get the timing and the spacing for cutscenes and whatnot down, and they can actually get the triggers set up and get those voice samples in. He was literally doing it without acting. Mark Meer was literally just reading lines, which is why his portrayal in Mass Effect 1 was so bad. I'm just going to say it. But he did a lot better in later games because he was actually acting. But yeah, I feel like it was that kind of situation. Maybe Aiden Pierce was just reading the lines. It's like, okay, and then we will go and destroy. Oh my God, I'm sorry for hampering on this, but my reason for bringing that up, and this is the cutoff point now. I had to do this after the cutoff point here. I mean, there's some. I actually have more to complain about. Let's go ahead and complain about more. We'll keep building. I have this note here. I'm just going to read what I wrote here perfectly. Or directly. Why have this serious, gritty attempt at realism in such a cartoony setting? This entire setting and its presentation does feel very much like a Grand Theft Auto kind of thing. In other words, not realistic. Very romanticized, very over the top. The physics are all over the place. Some of the things just do not work the way they work. They follow their own rules, etc. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Quite the contrary. I tend to enjoy that about most types of video games. See Just Cause 2 for probably the most extreme example of just does its own thing, non-realism. And yet, at so many points in time, they try to have this down-to-earth, normal, realistic, and gritty perspective of the actual story. And this is really shown in many of the characters. Quinn is a good example. The Nicole is a good example. The main villain is a good example, etc. All of it, that'll be Damien, by the way. And of course, Aiden himself. They keep trying to portray it as though these are normal people in a real-life, real-day situation. Like this was a True Crimes of Chicago kind of a situation. Or, well, I'd say the Untouchables, but that's actually still kind of romanticized. You get the point, though. These 2 points clash so violently that you can go back and forth between magic hacking and regenerating health and gunning your way through things and dozens of fixers who have access to heavy automatic weapons fighting in the middle of downtown Chicago without incident, and the magic system that controls everything and the car physics that are all over the place. It all feels like that sort of comic booky kind of a thing. And I loved that. And then they kind of switched gears into the super realistic, gritty thing. Now, you guys know I'm against realism in general in video games, but that's not what I mean. The super realistic, gritty thing would have worked if all of it was. The comic booky, cartoony thing would have worked if all of it was. These two things clashing so violently is one of the things that irritated me so much about that. All right, we'll go ahead and... yeah, we'll go ahead and cut it off here. I don't actually have much else to say. Everything else is going to be about story, setting, characters, etc. The cutoff point that I keep referring to is I want to explain why this game was almost a net negative for me. As I said in the assessment, it's not simple because what we have here, all these negative points I keep mentioning, are little things. And I know that. I wouldn't even be surprised if you've been yelling at your monitor saying, you're Arsh, you're just nitpicking. But the problem is, if you'll notice, everything I mentioned on that list is something that happens constantly in a game that, as I mentioned back in the assessment, is very long. So imagine if someone's just doing this to you. Now, this is nothing. This doesn't irritate me at all. Now, imagine I'm doing this for the next 40 hours. Constantly. Somewhere along the line, this is going to piss me off. I'm going to stop doing that because I'm already kind of irritable this morning. For real-life reasons. But, this is going to... That gets to you after a while. That's why this game was so negative for me, is because there was nothing actually wrong with it other than the stealth mechanic. That was the one true negative this game had, was the stealth thing. If you asked me and said, what's the one thing that was a net negative, I'd say that, nothing else. Everything else is something that's kind of good and kind of bad and mostly just kind of wrong or off. But it happens constantly, and there's no getting away from it. I felt that pushing through this game was a chore for me. I wanted to. One, because I have that whole, professional, I want to finish a game before I do a video on it. I have never once actually done a rumination on a game that I have not actually completed. And I intend to keep that trend, damn it. And I didn't want Watch Dogs to be the one that broke me. It almost did. Mostly on those stealth missions, which just, 70 seconds, 48 seconds. But the point is, all those other little things, it's like sleeping on a perfectly comfortable, normal bed, except there's a few hairs sticking out of the sheet that you can't get rid of, and they just kind of irritate your skin as you're sleeping. Until it gets to the point where it's not just an irritation, it's a full-out itching, and maybe you get a rash as a result of it. And it just builds and builds and builds. It's a tiny little thing, but there's dozens of them, and they don't go away. That is why Watch Dogs is such a difficult game for me to assess, to recommend. Because all those things, God, they pissed me off after a while. By the end of the game, I was just, I want to be done with this game, I want to be done with this game, I want to be done with this game. I failed the mission again. Hang on, let me wait for however long this time. Okay, let's just go. I didn't cheat, by the way. I'm not even sure if there are cheats for Watch Dogs. But it was just, by the end there. There were good things, and I mentioned the big ones earlier. I'm going to go ahead and re-mention the good last mission here, because I don't want to forget about it. The last mission was probably the best mission in the entire game. It was high-paced, it was very actiony, it was very adventure-y, it fully embraced that cartoony comic book feel, and at the same time never felt any less urgent for it. Right at the end there, Damien, the main villain, the foil to the main character, I'll talk about him in a moment, has basically gotten access to the CTOS, and therefore has the same power to hack and screw it up like you do. This manifests in several ways. Number one, everything that you could interact with on the road or on the streets or whatever, he is now going to do against you, just like you could use against other people. Making those blockers come up to crash your car, turning the street lights so you end up running into ongoing traffic, all of that stuff, the steam pipes bursting, all of that stuff is now being done against you. So you have just lost one of your most powerful tools while you're driving around the world, and you're actively under gun. That's the first point. Then he sends a literal swarm of scanners after you. For those of you who have not played this game, if you get caught within the scanner thing and a certain enough period of time passes, then the cops find your location and are sent after you. You actually get stars, basically, to use the GTA term. So he sends like a literal swarm of scanners. There's no evading them. And then the cops just swarm the crap out of you. For the first, half of the mission, I just assumed there was no losing the cops because of that thing. I actually got really lucky and managed to lose the cops, and I was like, yeah! And I drove off a bit, and then the swarm came, and the cops came back after me again, which actually I thought was really awesome, believe it or not. Because not only are the literal streets and lights and the system is attacking you, the cops are after you constantly, trying to ram you off the road, trying to shoot at you, the helicopter is chasing you. The whole thing was very hectic and very intense, but in a good way. At no point during that last mission did I feel an ounce of frustration or irritation. It was beautifully crafted, and I mean this sincerely. You were constantly under gun, and it felt like it. And that brings me to point 3. The user interface was screwed up because he was hacking you. Now, obviously, this is kind of a meta gameplay story segregation yet integration kind of a situation. But the point is, for example, you have to get to these 3 points, and they're all over the place throughout the city. You have to basically traverse the entirety of Chicago to get to these 3 points. But this point that's way over here, you see the waypoint on your screen and on your map, right? But as you're looking, there's also like 6 other waypoints that are just kind of over here and moving, and very easy, especially at a glance, to lose from that waypoint. You have to really focus to say, okay, that's the actual waypoint I'm looking at. And your screen will blip out occasionally, and your interface, the actual stuff which shows what your stats are, your health, your ammo, etc. That'll just kind of blip out or glitch out. So you're in these 3 ways, you're constantly under gun in the whole mission, and it was awesome. And then when you finally pull it off, you actually move out to this satellite and shut down everything. And I don't know, the whole thing was super awesome. Even the final confrontation on the lighthouse, it was really well done. I loved it. So that's a definite positive in favor of this game. There's another positive. I'm actually going to discuss it dead last, so we'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk about some of the other characters. I already mentioned Aiden Pierce was boring, dull, and disinteresting. He's a big old piece of cardboard. I liked Jordy. No, not that one. And I liked Clara. Spoiler alert, Clara is Bad Boy 17. You find that out very early on, though. I liked both of their characters. The voice actors and voice actress in both cases the voice actors were very well done. They did a good job of actually putting emotion and interest and flavor, subtlety into their roles. Clara has several sections, lots of foreshadowing with regard to her character, that she did very well. And she also has this interesting, I forget the specific name of it, but it's a French-Canadian accent. And she did I don't know if the actress actually has that accent or not, but she did a really good job of portraying it and definitely giving that flavor to her character in her. And she was very emotive. I always felt like she was a character, not a caricature. In other words, same thing with Geordi. He was a little bit more cartoony and open about it, but at the same time, he still felt like a human being underneath that. He was basically a fixer, a very specific type of fixer, and he was really good at it, and he happened to be good with Aiden, and I found myself liking Geordi almost immediately upon seeing him, a lot more than I liked the main character. So I really do have nothing but praise for those two things. But I do have to talk about another character. Two other characters, actually. One of them is Quinn, and the other one is Damien. I have right down here a note that literally says, ineffective, disinteresting, non-threatening villain. Let's talk about this for a moment, because this kind of applies to both. First of all, if you've played this game, I want you to think about something theoretically that was running through my mind as I was playing it. Wouldn't it have been more interesting if, instead of constantly interacting with Quinn the entire game, you just interact with his minions and his reputation and his forces that he sends after you? Imagine if the whole time they're constantly building up this mob boss who's effectively the mob boss of all of Chicago, the big guy, the one who's connected with everyone, the one who's in charge of everything, Lucky Quinn, and he's just got this mystique and this aura and this build around him, and then you meet him right there at the end. You corner him in his safe house, his safe vault thing, and that's when you find out he's just this. He's the character that he was. That's the point here. Quinn was just an old, kind of creepy, kind of ineffectual looking old man. But that would have worked so well if we had saved that till the end, if that had been the reveal, that this big, all-powerful crime boss was just this creepy old guy. I feel like that would have been much more impacting than, here's this creepy old guy, and by the way, you'll be seeing him and hearing from him constantly. And I guess that's really all I have to say about Quinn. He really did feel like he was the opposite of his reputation. He was just kind of not really imposing or impressive or anything, really. And again, I get that's kind of the point. I just feel like they could have presented that a little bit better. But let's talk about Damien. Now, Damien is the one who really deserves that disinteresting, non-threatening loser title. He is a complete loser. For once, though, I think this was actually kind of to the benefit of the story, as weird as that sounds. This guy is a loser. He's pathetic. He is not good at what he does. He is not a fixer or a solo, as I mentioned earlier in the Cyberpunk thing. He is a pure netrunner, to use the Cyberpunk term. It's all he's good at. Now, he is decently good at netrunning, but that's it. So he is basically completely ineffectual against someone like the main character, because the main character can just shoot him in the head or beat the crap out of him or whatever. But the main character never takes him seriously, which irritates and infuriates Damien because Damien's a loser. And so he takes all these kind of things as personal affronts and then just kind of moves on with his life. And he's constantly talking about how he wants this big legacy and he wants to be remembered as this great man and blah, 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 blah. Put his name on the landmark kind of a thing. Very indicative of his personality and character. And he's constantly whining at you. And yet, and this I've talked about this before, this is the difference between a well-presented character and a poorly presented character. This goes with writing as well as acting. Damien was well enough written and well enough acted that even though he was designed to be this loser, pathetic, ineffectual villain, it never actually irritated me. It never actually got to the point where I was frustrated by him. It never got to the point where I was like, oh yeah, whatever. I actually felt like he was probably one of the most realistic characters in the entire piece. And he was presented very well. And when you finally corner him on that lighthouse in that last mission, and he's just there, yeah, he's got nothing else at this point. He's just yelling and ranting at you because he can't properly understand the situation, and Lord knows he can't beat you. And he knows that to some extent or another. So it's weird because I feel like Quinn could have been done better, but Damien, despite being pathetic, was actually done very well. So again, one of the strange things about this game. So let me cover a couple other points here before we pull into the big things, the theme, and then the final point. The main plot of this game feels disconnected. I wrote the word meandering down here. Loosely connected acts with no real overarching plot to them is basically the best way I would explain it. At first, it's about finding out who did this. And then it's about saving your sister, and then it's about saving your sister again, and then it's about continuing to save your sister, and then it's about, and then you win, and that's kind of the end. It's one of those games that if I was to describe the plot of it, not counting something I'll talk about later, I would just kind of shrug. Like, there's not really a main plot. So plot is not a big focus in this game. Characterization, well, I kind of already covered that. The main character is cardboard. A lot of the supporting characters are actually quite good. I also really liked, I suddenly can't think of his name. The legend hacker, Lenny or whatever his name was. I liked him too. He was pretty cool. So a lot of good supporting cast, so some pretty good characterization. Only one of the characters really grows over the course of the story, but it was done very well, and that is Clara, by the way. And so we've got that setting. The setting is amazing. I'll be talking about this some more in just a bit here. But the setting was very well done, and definitely had me interested in learning what was going to happen next. The theme, well, again, we'll talk about that in a moment, and that just leaves us with character growth, which I already talked about. So let's talk about the setting first here. Well, no, let's talk about Clara. We just talked about characterization and character growth. Clara is the only real mystery of the entire game. There's actually two. Spoiler alert. One of these is a twist, and one of these is a reveal. And I'm going to define the difference between these two. The twist is what the video really was. The event, I'm going to just say this flat out. Super spoilers. This is your big last chance. I mean, I already gave the spoiler warning earlier, whatever the sound was. The biggest twist in this game is that all of the events in the entire game are set off because you were hacking this one hotel, and it was assumed that you were trying to steal this blackmail information about the mayor killing his wife or lover or whatever. I think it was his wife. We don't find that out until literally the second or third to last mission in the entire game. It's way at the end. And one of the points of this was that all this stuff, all these horrible things, all the events in the entire game have happened just because of some blackmail material that he was afraid of losing that you didn't care about to begin with. And so that's the twist. Now, the reason I call it a twist is it wasn't very well publicized, it wasn't very well hinted at, and it really is one of those you wouldn't have expected it kind of things, right? Now, a reveal is something that you build towards. A reveal is something that there's foreshadowing, there's hinting. Even if you can't guess what it is, you're definitely trying to figure out what's going on here. The reveal is the one with Clara, and the fact that Clara was the one who hacked Aiden and Damien, and therefore led to the death of your niece. And that was definitely a reveal. That was much better handled. The scene where it finally happened was awesome for many different reasons. Very well presented, very well executed, and interesting. I actually admittedly guessed that fairly early on. There were a lot of really good foreshadowing hints of it, though. The way Clara would act around certain subjects. There was certain emails you could catch, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of hinting about that, but it was still very well done, so, there's no complaining here. So that's those two things, and that's one of the reasons why I mentioned the characterization of Clara, because you see her actually kind of change and evolve as the game goes on. You see her with the emotional front. You see her with the vulnerability on display. You see her with the frustration and being scared about the idea of actually killing. You see her with the idea of hiding behind the monitor. You see her desperately trying to make things better, repentant, and then you see her die. One of the few deaths in the game you can't actually avoid, which actually I found to be very sad, because, as I said, I liked Clara. But we'll talk about that more in a bit. So, that's the characterization aspect. Let's talk about the setting. So very early on, playing through this game, I'm like, yeah, okay, these are the Templars. I'm not even kidding. But I didn't mean that as a negative thing. For those of you not familiar with this, Watch Dogs was originally hinted at existing within the same setting, same continuity, same canon, same connectivity to the Assassin's Creed series, modern day, obviously. Now, I mention this because this really adds to the flavor and lore of both. In Watch Dogs, we see exactly what modern-day life really is in full detail. The level of integration technology has, the level of influence those in power have, the amount of lack of privacy that people have, the amount of which information can use to change things, the degree of... It's just everything. Everything about the modern-day world that we see in Watch Dogs helps flavor Assassin's Creed, right? And therefore, and the connection between the two also helps strengthen Watch Dogs because Abstergo and the well, I think Abstergo's mentioned one, but the Templars and the whole, the old ones, all that fun stuff is basically never actually mentioned at Watch Dogs, but it serves as kind of a backdrop to it and helps explain why Bloom is doing what it's doing, why they have so much proper funding, why they're being so successful, blah blah blah, all this little stuff. It adds to both having that connection. And that's awesome, which is why it's stupid that it isn't. I'm just going to say this bluntly, okay? I thought about making up an analogy, but I'm just going to spoil this. This is kind of, sort of, not really spoilers for Assassin's Creed 4, so this is your third spoiler warning here. The CCO or CEO or whatever, one of the head guys at the Abstergo Entertainment Industries over in Assassin's Creed 4, in Assassin's Creed 4, leaves the premises to go to Chicago, to go at a Bloom Corporation, I'm really emphasizing these points, meeting, get together. And then you never hear from him again. Let's get over to Watch Dogs. There is a side mission you can do, which, yes, I did, where you meet this guy, same name, same occupation. I think they actually got the title different, but anyway, same guy. From Abstergo Entertainment, who is wanted by a group called the Assassin Brotherhood, who you can take a hit out on him and kill him after he goes to that Bloom thing I just mentioned. Also worth noting that, as we find out in Assassin's Creed 4, this guy is both aware of and complicit. He is part of the Templar Order, the Abstergo conspiracy, whatever you want to call that. And you kill him in Chicago after the... You get where I'm going with this. That's pretty one-to-one, right? I mean, that's like a really concrete connection between the two settings. Hard to deny, hard to do. Of course, that's why Ubisoft or whoever is in charge actually has denied it. It actually took me some digging to find this. I'm still not sure if this is 100% true or not, because they might change their mind again. But one of the lead developers actually went out and said, no, this is just an Easter egg. It's just a fun thing. The two settings are not connected. I actually had to find this exact quote to share with PAX, because he actually didn't believe me when I shared this, because it made so much sense that the two were connected. And as I just described, they're literally connected. But no, it's just an Easter egg, and the two have nothing to do with each other. Now, I actually spent, off and on, 2 days trying to come up with a reason why they would deny that connection. I asked friends and family members if they could come up with anything. We've got nothing. We literally cannot come up with a good reason why it is that they would try to segregate these two settings. Not one. Moving on. That's the setting. Now, hang on just a second. I talked about the theme, right? Okay, so we're building up to. We're almost done here. Talk about the theme of this game. The obvious. This is. I say this often. There's an obvious theme and there's a non-obvious theme. The obvious theme is obvious. Secrets and privacy and all that fun stuff, and how information should be free. And I'm tired of the noise. I'm tired of the mess. Blah blah. That's the obvious theme. I'm not even going to talk about that. There's nothing to talk about there. I'm going to talk about the non-obvious theme, which is the different ways people act, different ways people behave. Now, I say that so generally because I mean that generally. The obvious way to explain this is we've got our public face and we've got our private face. But even that is just generalizing on the subject. This is true in real life, we as people behave differently depending on whom we're around and what we're doing and who we know is watching us. And if we're completely alone, who you are in the dark is definitely going to be different than who you are around everyone else. Now, the extent to which this is true varies. I actually am probably one of the least varied people I know for that. I tend to act a little bit differently around certain people because I like to get along with people. But in general, the person you're seeing sit in front of you with this camera right now, and the person you would meet, if you were there at Gen Con and I got to shake your hand or whatever, are pretty much going to be the same person. But even still, there are things that are different about me, depending on whom I'm with, and how I'm acting, and where I am. We see this in every single character. Aiden Pierce is actually the best example. I kind of want to talk about this last, so we'll put him back there. Whoa. Don't want to flip off the camera there. Clara. Clara is, she puts on the tough front. and she says it herself. She feels like she's safe behind the monitors. She feels like she's okay there. And she puts on this facade, but the whole time she is in grieving over what she did, especially because she fully blames herself for it, and she understands that she is fully culpable. That she can't give an excuse for it. It was just a job or whatever. No, it doesn't work that way. The way that Lenny, or whatever his name is, worked differently when he was drunk or when he was open about what he was, when he was talking about why he was doing what he was doing, etc., etc. The way that Quinn, this is a really obvious one, Quinn and the mayor, both putting on these completely fake facades in front of everyone else, completely altering their personality and the way they act, and then changing to something closer to who they actually are when they're behind the camera. The way that people can change based off of stimulus, because as we learn, the mayor was actually manipulated into going against his wife thanks to what is effectively superliminal manipulation. It's actually more like liminal manipulation, but whatever. It's not subliminal, but moving on. We see this throughout every character in this thing. Damien is another good example. The big tough guy who acts all tough and is all rah, and he's constantly throwing up this front, and so forth and so on. But let's go ahead and get back to Aiden Pierce, the vigilante. Because this leads nicely into my final point. Aiden, we only actually see the real Aiden in 2 instances throughout the game. Now, I say instances to make this clear. Every time he's narrating, we are hearing the real Aiden Pierce, the actual person, the real character there. And during one other instance, when he loses control of himself just a bit, when he finds out that Clara was the one who hacked him and led to his niece's death. That was him. He was so shocked and so stunned by that and the emotions that were running through him that he actually dropped the mask just for a few seconds before he managed to recover it. But I mention this because Aiden Pierce constantly has a mask up. He shifts which mask is up. He changes how he's acting. Sometimes he'll be the completely, the professional stoolie. Sometimes he'll be the threatening, intimidating guy. Sometimes he'll be the nice, getting along with you. Sometimes he'll be the uncle. Sometimes he'll be the brother. But all of these are masks. All of these are just him manipulating the situation, manipulating the people around him by presenting himself in a different fashion. And again, the only time we actually see the actual Aiden Pierce, well, we never actually see it. We just hear it in his narration after the facts. Now, that leads me into my final point. I've been debating how to phrase this for a while, so I'm very, very curious. If you feel like leaving in the comments, if you've watched this far, please feel free to comment on this thing. I'd love your input. This is one of the worst told Batman origin stories I've ever seen. I'm just gonna lay it out there. Now I gotta explain. Okay, first of all, I do not mean literally Batman, obviously. But there is definitely a archetype of a superhero who is the Batman type. He has no superpowers, but he has access to resources. He has access to his own intelligence. He has access to a great deal of skill. I usually refer to this as the far end of the bell curve kind of an individual. Still human, but strong enough and skilled enough and versed enough and intelligent enough and with enough resources that they effectively could be treated as superhuman, like Batman, like Iron Man. Like there's several examples of this. Hawkeye, the Green Arrow. You get the idea. So that's basically Aiden Pierce. He is very, very good in melee combat. He knows how to use just about any weapon he gets his hand on. He can drive just about any car well and very expertly, at least in lore. He's got his magic hacking wand tool that he can use to hack the heck out of everything, etc., etc. He's got all the things. He's got all the gadgets, even with all those things I mentioned. I said I'd mention this way later. He's got access to all these gadgets that he can make and craft in order to manipulate the situation. And of course, as I just mentioned, he's very manipulative, even on a personal level. Everything I just talked about with him changing his personality and changing how he presents himself is something that is very Batman. The idea of trying to manipulate people, even on a subliminal or a subconscious level, so that they perceive him differently based on who he's with and why he's with them and which persona he's showing them at the time, etc., etc. So, yeah, that's actually kind of interesting in its own right, but so many pieces of the puzzle of this game came together when I realized this. I will freely admit that I'm an idiot. I didn't realize that this was a Batman origin story until pretty much the end of the game. But a lot of things made sense in there. Remember I mentioned that the plot is kind of... That's because the plot is the birth of the vigilante. That actually is the main plot. The vigilante, which is his superhero name, being birthed. This is literally a superhero origin story. Bear with me. The introduction of so many characters who had relatively little influence on things, or whose plot lines were basically left completely dangling, or who left other possibilities for their stories to continue, like Bedbug and Default and I can't think of any other names off the top of my head, but there's several characters who just kind of show up, and then their plot lines are just kind of left dangling for the future. The possibility of building up the big mega corporation of Bloom, getting the governorship from that, blah blah blah. The arch rival possibilities, both within Geordi and of course within Damien. Now, granted, Damien's dead, but still, etc. etc. They're even really blatant about it sometimes. I can't believe I missed this. If you fail to stop and kill Default, which is kind of an optional thing, so whatever, you will. It's really hard to do too. You will go and find him. You never actually see his face the whole game, or hear his voice. He's always got this mouse mask on. And Aiden Pierce, in the narration, real Aiden, says, and I quote, well, paraphrased, that supervillain mask is just crying out for a cause. I can't believe I missed that. It did sit in my mind for a while. But yeah, this entire game is literally the origin story for the Vigilante, and building up to the point where Watch Dogs 2 will now be about the Vigilante and the various supervillains in the Batman-ish style archetype that we will see. And again, that's true. If you look at the Batman villains, some of them are certainly cartoonish, but they're still people. The Joker, the Riddler, Two-Face, Penguin, all of these people, there are exceptions, but all of the main villains, all of the main bad guy list for the Batman mythos are people just like he is. They just have access to things, or maybe they have good resources, or maybe they're good at blah, or maybe they're just crazy. And that's exactly the kind of people we fight against in this game. And he's even got his own catchphrase about how he cleans up messes and stuff. I can't believe I didn't catch on to this earlier. So many aspects of this game make so much more sense with that in mind. What happened with Nicole, leading his family away, finally saying goodbye to them, the tragic loss of his niece and then his friend Clara, the discontinuation of his power base and the loss of his what had become his central operations area. All of these things scream origin story and scream this is the beginning of the tale. So I actually this is my final point. I do genuinely view the game in a slightly different and admittedly more positive light with that perspective. Not sure I'm going to play it again, but I am very interested in seeing what's going to happen with the Vigilante next in the Watch Dogs 2, assuming it ever comes out. And assuming it's connected to Assassin's Creed, damn it. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and shut off here. No big hacking things. Like I said, nice and analog. I'll see you around.